had lots and lots of chats with people who were involved in the PPE Medpro contracts and the Michelle Mone saga, and they all tell me that they're quite categorical that they do not believe she disclosed her financial interest in this company.
Michelle Mone, let's start there. There's been all the drama with Michelle Mone this week. She did her interview last Monday with Laura Kuenssberg, in which she sort of said that she had lied about her involvement to the press, but actually all ministers and the government knew about it. There's also been some really sort of quite strong pushback from various government figures. Michael Gove, Rishi Sunak, both seem to be really sort of wading into this story quite aggressively. What's government thinking about this story and how it's going to go? Are they worried, and in what direction are they worried, and so on?
Well, it's obviously very unwelcome attention for the government because for several years after the beginning of the pandemic, we had a lot of media stories around the so-called VIP lane, which was the contracts that were awarded to people. And this lane basically allowed peers, Conservative MPs, and people in government to refer people bidding for COVID contracts, procurement contracts, into a priority lane. And there was lots of controversy around it. There were a number of prominent Tory donors, peers, etc., who were associated with these contracts, and it was all very bad for the government. And it took place against the backdrop of Boris Johnson and his party facing allegations of cronyism and sleaze. So this is all now back in the news because of Michelle Mone. And she's obviously, the stakes are quite high for Michelle Mone. She's obviously and this company that she represents, PPE Medpro, they're obviously under investigation by the National Crime Agency. So she has come out fighting, and she's slinging mud left, right and centre at the government. And they are pushing back. Michael Gove actually said in a speech a few days later that he believes a case and hopes a case can be brought against her.
I thought that was a remarkable thing for him to say.
Yes. Now, obviously, I think that's as far as he said publicly, but my understanding is behind the scenes, people like Michael Gove are very, very cross at the comments that Michelle Mone has made. And there is a sense, she's obviously made a lot of very strong allegations. She's trying to fight back in the court of public opinion. But there are a lot of allegations that she's made which she hasn't yet substantiated with evidence. And the Times today, in its report, makes that point that they have yet to provide messages from Michael Gove or Jim Bethell, the health minister, or Matt Hancock, showing that she had disclosed her involvement to them. And I've asked for those messages too, and they haven't been forthcoming. But in the last few days, I've had lots and lots of chats with people who are involved in the PPE Medpro contracts and the Michelle Mone saga, and they all tell me that they're quite categorical that they do not believe she disclosed her financial interest in this company.
The flip side there is that you have people like Lord Bethell, like Michael Gove, like others, receiving messages from Michelle Mone saying, I can help by linking you up with this company, and never for a moment beginning to wonder, oh, maybe she's got a stake in this. Never saying to her, who's behind this company? Might it be your husband? Just the absence of... Never mind the absence of sort of due diligence.
Yes.
The absence of a 3-minute conversation, a 3-second conversation, just seems kind of remarkable there.
It's a very legitimate question to ask, actually. And and also what's also remarkable is that if you actually look at the company itself, PPE Medpro, this was a company that was set up a few days after Michelle Mone actually first started messaging ministers. Now, it had no history. She has lots of links to industrial production of garments and so forth. She was a very successful businesswoman, but this company was newly incorporated and it had no prior experience or track record of delivering the goods it was giving contracts for. So I think this does raise legitimate questions about the way this VIP lane operated. The only thing I would say for balance is that when you speak to people in government about these decisions, they will point out to you that there were dozens and dozens of peers and MPs who were coming forward with proposals and recommendations. And a number of those people, they disclosed that they had interests. They disclosed them on their financial register of interests. Again, Michelle Mone did not do that. Basically, they're saying you just have to understand the context in which the government was operating.
That's fair.
There were so many people coming forward with offers that the government simply didn't have time potentially to do the due diligence it would normally have done in kind of so-called peacetime.
So much sort of fear and meltdown generally that they were just trying to get it done. I can understand that. Let's talk briefly about the economy. We learnt this week that the economy shrank for a second quarter between July and September, meaning if it has shrunk in the quarter we're about to finish, which we'll find out in the next few weeks, I suppose, then we will have been in a recession. This is not super news for the government, is it?
No, it definitely isn't. And not when we're coming towards the end of the year, when the Prime Minister's 5 pledges that he made at the beginning of 2023 are going to be under the microscope.
Yeah.
Because he has only hit, as far as anyone can see, one of his pledges so far, which is to halve inflation.
Yep.
So you had a bit of a bittersweet moment this week where inflation fell to 3.9%, which was a lot lower than economists had expected. So that was, broadly welcomed and seen as good news for Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt. But then, as you say, the ONS has revised its figures on the economy, showing minimal, and in fact, as you say, minus 0.1 growth in the second quarter of the year. So it's not looking as though that picture is going to improve at all for the coming months ahead. And the OBR's projections on the economy are quite gloomy. And that's not good news for a prime minister that's heading into an election year, 20 points behind in the polls. People always tend to vote in elections, as you and I have discussed before, with their wallets. Yeah. And if they think the economy's not working, they think that public services aren't performing, then they'll vote accordingly. And it's not a good situation for him to be in.
I mean, what's sort of remarkable about it is we all feel like we've had a difficult year. We all thought the year past was going to be the difficult year, and next year's the point where it starts to get better. Yeah. And now you're starting to think, well, maybe that was just sort of pie in the sky.
No, absolutely. There are some glimmers of hope on the horizon. The fact that inflation has fallen and will continue to fall in the new year is good news, because it means that mortgage rates and the Bank of England, there's growing optimism among economists that the Bank of England may start to cut the base rate.
But if they're doing that because we're in recession, yes. It's
that's the oddity actually of the economic cycle, which is sometimes in order to control inflation, you have to almost put the economy into recession, and the government will never admit to this. But the reality is the monetary policy of both the Bank of England and the fiscal policy of the government has been effectively to reduce economic growth in order to reduce inflation.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where we are. Look, let's turn to some more sort of immediate news. Excuse me. The front page of the Times today reports that ministers are pushing for facial recognition cameras to be used routinely in town centres after trials in London and in South Wales. This is another sort of contentious and delicate issues, especially because there's meant to be problems with racial profiling particularly. But it's also a slightly remarkable thing for, I guess, a Conservative government to be talking about doing. You can imagine this being the sort of thing that a Conservative government or a Conservative opposition goes to war with a Labour government because they want to do it, and they call them authoritarian and all the rest of it. David Davis isn't going to like this.
No, when I was reading this story this morning, my first thought is I can see a parliamentary intervention coming from David Davis in the new year.
I don't remember why he resigned, but it was something like this, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it was Brexit, but he's taken a very principled position on privacy issues in the past. And you're right. I mean, from the libertarian wing of the Conservative Party, you're probably going to hear quite a few people grumbling, because to many people, this will be seen as quite Orwellian. It feels one step along the creeping path to a more police state, Minority Report
world. Yeah, exactly.
Minority Report world. But if you actually look at the details of what's going on, this is basically 2 pilots that are being conducted by the Metropolitan Police in London and the neighbouring areas, and also in South Wales around Cardiff and Swansea. And the results so far, this technology is quite remarkable. They've been very successful. In just a few hours, they deployed these cameras on 2 different days in December, and I think the figures were they managed to catch 17 people in just a space of several hours. And you think that will provide benefits for policing, because it will free up officers who would otherwise have to spend hours manually trawling through CCTV footage to find people. They will be able to be out on the street, there'll be more presence on the streets, then it's also just more effective and easier to catch criminals if you can immediately identify them. You can deploy police officers to those areas. But as you say, there are also the concerns about racial profiling, because this technology, if the accuracy settings or the confidence settings are turned down too low to try and catch a wider net of people, it has been shown to actually misidentify certain ethnic minority groups. So you have to proceed carefully with this, and it will be interesting to see how this progresses going forward. The only thing I would point out is that this isn't something that the government can impose on police forces. It's actually, because they're operationally independent, it will be for them to decide. The only way that the government could really intervene here is if they decided to stop it and adopt the kind of measures that the EU has done. It's passed recently an AI Act prohibiting the use of this kind of technology in public spaces. But it certainly seems like this government's quite keen to proceed with this. And if Labour get into government, I've never detected that Keir Starmer is on the sort of libertarian side of the argument.
Absolutely. Look, briefly, before I let you go, NHS strikes, junior doctor strikes, one's just finished, another beginning after the new year. One gets a sense that the government is just sort of sitting back and waiting for the junior doctors to come to heel rather than being particularly proactive. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, it is fair. That is exactly the situation we find ourselves in. I've had quite a few conversations over the last 48 hours with people in government about this situation. And the reality is this: the junior doctors decided to walk away from the negotiating table when a total offer of about 14% was on the table for them. And the government's position has been that it will not countenance making another offer to the junior doctors until they call off the strike action. So that means that we're just stuck in a rut here, and the clock's ticking down to the new year. We've just had 3 days of quite damaging strike action, and we've seen the figures about what that's done in terms of people being stuck in ambulances, the failure to discharge people, and that's only going to grow in the new year. These strikes couldn't really take place at a worse time for the NHS. The 3rd of January is normally the day when the winter crisis reaches its peak. And right now, I am not detecting any sense that there's going to be a breakthrough in the next few days.
Gosh, well, thank you very much, Harry.